Hello everybody and welcome to today's CG seminar. My name's Rachel Brooks, I'm Professor of Higher Education Studies here at Oxford and I'm going to be chairing today's session. So very warm welcome. We're running this hybrid. We have some people in the room here at Oxford and then obviously some colleagues online. So warm welcome however you're joining us. Really delighted to have two colleagues who have come along to Oxford today to present. Emily Henderson and Aroyka Mary. Just a few words about them for you. Emily is Professor and Director of the Doctoral Education and Academia Research Centre at the University of Warwick and is also based in Education Studies. Emily's involved in a huge range of projects. I'll just give you a flavour of two of them. First of all, a 4-year project on widening participation in India, which we'll be drawing on that today, yeah. And then, and also a project about the aims, nature and values for education-related research centres. So Emily has quite diverse research interest in higher education. And she's also published extensively. She's co-authored Gendering the Massification Generation, Higher Education Access and Choice in India, and also Making Sense of Academic Conferences, amongst other things. Emily also runs a blog called Conference Inference, and she's also co-convener of the Diary Method Community, an online community of practice for diary researchers. So thank you very much for joining us today, Emily. And Emily's joined by her colleague Aroyka Mary. So welcome, Aroyka. Aroyka is currently an ESRC UKRI funded PhD student at the Department for Education Studies at the University of Warwick. And she's been working on the Widening Access to Higher Education in India project as a research assistant. Aroyka is also Assistant Professor in the School of Education, the Central University of Kashmir since 2017, where she's run courses on gender and education, pedagogy of English language, and other courses related to pedagogy for both undergraduate and postgraduate students. She also has significant interest in research methodologies and has initiated a web lecture series on qualitative methods in previous years. Like Emily, Aroyka has published widely, including with Routledge last year, implementing the sexual harassment law within higher education, a qualitative inquiry. So thank you both very much for joining us. And as you can see on the slides, their talk is called Towards Capability for Higher Education Outreach, Exploring the Role of Faculty Members in Tackling Educational Inequalities in India. They're going to talk for about 40 minutes and then there'll be some time for question and discussion. Please do feel free, those of you online, to put your questions in the chat as we go. So thank you very much for joining us and over to you.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and everyone here for the warm welcome. Really delighted to be joining a CG event, which I've been looking forward to doing for a long time. As Rachel said, I'm Emily, this is Aroyka. And Aroyka, I don't know if you wanted to mention anything else about your affiliation.
I think Rachel has covered it all.
Okay, yeah. I think we're both introduced at this point. So we are here presenting in person on the project today. But as you can see from the first slide, we're from a wide project team. I co-lead this project with Dr. Nidhi Sabharwal at CPRHE NEPA, who, for those in the room, is emblazoned on our screen right now over there. And we also have Anne Stewart from the Law School at Warwick, who's also waving there for those in the room. She's also part of the leadership team. And then Aroyka, as well as Denise Leo Sierra, Ragini Kurana, and Arushi Penuli, some of whom may be here or may not be here. That's the whole team that has been involved in this stage of the project that we'll be talking about today, and particularly the pilot study. So that's our full extent of team. Oh, now the slides aren't going to be. Good test. There we go. All right. So we're going to start our talk today with giving a flavour of the topic that we are addressing here, and then we'll dive into more of the detail. So we've provided here 3 quotes from our study. These are all from faculty members who are based in a publicly funded college on the outskirts of Delhi. And they are all in relation to, in some way, helping or guiding prospective higher education students to think about their higher education options. So if we look at Singh's quote, first of all, the academic here is saying that the prospective students have a strong trust on us, that we as faculty members can guide properly, how they should prepare, what they should prepare, and like that. Second example of giving this flavor here is Athene. And she refers to the fact that her father had a gardener working with her, and they had little educational experience in their family, meaning that in a sense, the daughters turned to Athene as a faculty member to get advice on what they should think about for their higher education future. And then we also have a quote from Victor, another faculty member, saying that he was helping people out of a sense of social responsibility that sort of motivate him, that he was seeing young people around and their families who were worried about how to get admission into higher education. And through his guidance that they were becoming more informed about what to do. So this gives a kind of flavor, just jump right into the deep end of the kinds of things that we're interested about in this project. So then to think a bit more about the presentation today, we're going to give a bit more background for our wider project and the wider trajectory of work that this project is situated in. And part of that is just to show out of interest what we're working on, but also I think it's quite important to kind of think about these large-scale transnational type projects and demystify the workings of them. So we're trying to give an insight into not just what we're finding, but what we're doing and how we're doing it. And then we'll go a bit more into higher education outreach as our kind of topic and the Indian context for higher education outreach. Then we'll talk a bit more about particularly our pilot study. That's what we're talking about the findings from today. And we're working towards a conceptualization of our kind of key project aims using the capability approach. So we're looking at developing a capability for higher education outreach. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll run through the findings and then come to the conclusion. And during the Q&A, to the extent that we can make the technology work, I'll hopefully be able to bring some of our colleagues in who've joined online to answer questions. We'll see how we get on with that. Okay, so to give a bit of an overview, this current project, WAHE, is based in quite a long trajectory, as you can see here, of work, which has been funded very generously by the Fair Chance Foundation. We've had some other support in there from things like ESRC impact funding, but otherwise the main funder for this really important trajectory has been the Fair Chance Foundation, and we're extremely grateful for their support. Our first project focused on one state, so the state of Haryana in northern India. And that project, a 5-year project, was specifically around exploring how access and choice in publicly funded institutions in India, in Haryana, was gendered. And we selected the publicly funded government colleges because they're often the local and often the lowest cost form of higher education that is therefore accessed more commonly by young people from more economically and socially disadvantaged backgrounds. So we wanted to understand, even though young people were gaining access, and at that point, you know, India is now in the massification stage, so young people are gaining access, but there are a lot of gendered inequalities that emerge around choice in particular that emerge, and that's what we were focusing on in that project. And maybe I could just flash up at this point our shiny book from 2024, Gendering the Massification Generation. That was the book from that project. So some of the findings from that first project that inspired our more recent project were around, firstly, the fact that we identified that young people in disadvantaged areas, particularly rural areas, needed more information about their higher education options, more reliable information to make informed choice. And that there was a kind of lack of that information around. And accompanying that, in the publicly funded institutions, it's slightly different in the private sector, but in publicly funded institutions, there isn't or hasn't been really a formal higher education outreach culture. We'll talk a bit more about what we mean, but not really activities designed to explain the admissions process or the options to young people finishing school. At the same time, we picked up on already from that project the existence of informal higher education outreach. And you can see this in the speech bubble at the top here, where a student says, recommended by my neighbourhood professor, an amazing sir. So we saw snippets like this of faculty members were doing things to help young people make choices, but informally and in their own time often. At the same time, through our project, in the latter stages, we trialled a Taste a Day initiative in colleges in Haryana, and we found a really positive appetite for running this kind of activity among faculty members. So this seemed like a really germane topic to explore in more depth in the WAHEI project. So WAHEI, which is widening access to higher education in India, institutional approaches, this project has a national focus, and we're looking at 6 states across the 6 regions of India. And in each state, 4 higher education institutions are included. And we are exploring what faculty members are already doing in terms of informal outreach culture and activities. And we're specifically looking at rural and semi-urban located institutions or institutions serving rural and semi-urban areas, because generally in those areas there's less of a background of higher education in families. And that means that often the local college is probably the only place that you can really get reliable information about higher education. So thinking of higher education colleges in rural areas as being kind of like college knowledge hubs is a way we're putting it. So in our project, we're going to be focusing on our pilot study from today. We'll say more about that. But the project includes a substantial research phase, and then a final phase including developing, piloting and researching a professional learning module for faculty members about higher education outreach, and a national policy conference in collaboration with the institution where Nidhi Sabharwal is based, which is the National Institute for Educational Planning and Administration, which has close ties with the Ministry of Education. So just to say a little bit more about the nature of the project, and as I was saying at the beginning, it's really important that we include in this kind of presentation not just our findings, but how we're doing things. And we are following a collaborative model of research that has been developed at CPRHE and NIPA. And this involves a team of researchers based in each of the states that we are working in, who are, so in each state, we have a team of 3 faculty members, 1 from a state university and 2 from a state university, sorry, and 1 from a government college. And these teams have led on what you will see as a complex exercise of data collection, and are now leading on the analysis of the data from their states. I'm not sure if any of them are here today. I haven't been able to fully track the number of people coming in, but if they are, welcome. Very integral to our project, so be delighted that some of you might be hearing this today. The state teams are at the moment in the analysis and reporting phase, and we have regular online meetings and some meetings in Delhi, and we'll be having 1 meeting in the UK as part of the project to track through the process together. And you can see on this map the states, the spread of states that we're working with for the project. I'm not going to dwell too long on our research design, but again, just thought it's important to show the workings of the project. So we're using quite a few different methods in our substantive research phase. And that is because when we're exploring an issue that in a sense has no name, higher education outreach isn't a word that's deployed in the Indian context mostly currently. So to explore something that has no name, in a sense, we have to try as many different avenues as possible to try and get a real picture. And it's important to say we didn't want to impose a sense of what UK outreach should look like in India. We wanted to understand what's already happening and what could therefore be formalized. So we wanted to have a rich study. So in each of the states, in one state university, there's an interview with the institutional leader, the most relevant senior figure to this issue. And then with faculty members, a survey aiming to cover all faculty members who work with undergraduate students and college, the institutional administrative data as well, around the kind of numbers and background of faculty members. And then we, in that institution, 5 in-depth interviews with faculty members who then keep a longitudinal diary of any outreach-like activities they are engaging in, and then a interview following on from that. And then we were also talking to undergraduate students about their own experiences of any outreach they may have been, whether informal or however informal, they may have been somehow involved in, and also their views on what would have helped. So with that, we engaged in focus group discussions and individual interviews, a survey with first-year undergraduate students, and again, some institutional information. So that state university design was then also replicated in a government college, and the pilot study that we're reporting on today takes, if you like, that one box, the government college box. That's what we used as our pilot study. But then also 2 further government colleges were included, so 4 institutions in total, but per state, with slightly less data collection happening in those 2 additional ones. So I hope I've made some sense there in terms of mapping out the design of the study that we've used. So that constitutes the sort of introduction to the project, how it came about, and what we're doing in it. And now we'll move a little bit more into the substantive topic of today. So Arokia, over to you.
Thank you, Emily, and thanks for giving the overall picture of the project. So I begin with setting out what does higher education outreach mean in the Indian context. In the context of this project, that is widening access to higher education, we define higher education outreach as the support that is provided by the higher education institution and people, that is faculty members, to prospective undergraduate students to make higher education choices, which could be called as informed choices rather than making random decisions about higher education based on seats availability or any other guidance from family members. So in this context, higher education outreach is a valuable aspect for prospective students, especially from those from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds where history of higher education is not present. And the only source, as Emily was mentioning, of making higher education choices, informed decisions, might be the faculty members who might be in their local circles or the colleges themselves located in the rural pockets of those regions. So even though in India, the GER is massively increasing and there is gender parity that exists within the statistics, there are many hidden inequalities that are there which do not come up in the statistics, like how the choices regarding higher education courses, institutions are made. I'll be covering that in the next slide. But by bringing in the higher education outreach as a practice, this project at first tries to unpack all the hidden inequalities students from disadvantaged backgrounds have while choosing or making decisions about higher education in India. One such example could be of the Taster Day that was organized with the first project, which had an increased appetite and also reported that evidenced that the Taster Day brought in an internal change in how students from rural communities viewed higher education choices or decision making in itself. Moving to the next slide, the higher education context of India. So as I had set out that within the higher education context in India, many students are making choices based on incomplete knowledge, which could be based on peer pressure, as Harry mentions here. He elucidates his struggle of how he decided the course that he wanted to pursue in his undergrad by saying, like, consulting with his peers who themselves were not as informed as they could be, in the sense, how will it happen? How would the admission happen? So they discouraged me. The peers discouraged me in the sense, you should do something else. The rationale was that the seats aren't enough for you to get into the course that you aspire for, and thus you should seek some other course, which might seem very rational, but from people who themselves were then applying for higher education, it didn't come across as someone who knew about the higher education context of getting into the particular course. So India also has a strong presence of affirmative action in the public higher education spaces, where most number of seats are filled up as allocated quotas and seats for various sections of the society through like the socioeconomically disadvantaged groups are represented. But are these choices that are then actioned informed is the question that this project opens up. And this is further complicated by the presence of community outreach, a strong sense and ethos of community outreach that exists within India, which has a very different flair than higher education outreach. In the sense, higher education institutions are very much embedded in the local community in social service programs such as cleanups programs, cleanliness drives, and college-based community activity like setting up of plant nursery within the higher education institution and they reach out to the surrounding community. How does then higher education outreach stand out when there is already a presence of community outreach and there is a tendency to confuse within the pilot study? There was a tendency to swiftly shift between participants shifting between community outreach and higher education outreach concepts that were evidenced. So as Emily had set out earlier, the higher education outreach activities are currently not formalized, but they do exist in informal, and we'll come to that. And as a reflection of it, the faculty members' academic trajectories do reflect their involvement in informal outreach activities, but it is not institutionally or structurally recognized through the academic performance indicators or does not reflect in the academic promotions or career development programs as per se. At the national level, the National Education Policy in 2020 has emphasized higher education outreach as an imperative for further massification and spread of higher education with an aim to massify higher education access to 50% of gross enrollment ratio. The pilot study on which our current presentation is based on a college which is located in the peripheral of Delhi, which was selected particularly for its location as it was preferred by students from disadvantaged groups in the community. In the sense, this college was affiliated to a prestigious university in Delhi, but also the fact that the mission as well as the alignment of college was such that it featured amongst like the A ranking institutions. And then full range of instruments that we saw in the initial slide was piloted within the college. And this presentation is based on semi-structured interviews with the principal, semi-structured interviews with the faculty members, then spanning out to how higher education practices or like how faculty members are engaged in advising students through the diary study of 6 weeks. How does it look like in their day-to-day lives through the diary study with a post-diary interview and also a survey questionnaire to supplement the findings that came through the other instruments in the sense like survey with faculty members and for survey with UG students to gather students' perspective through focus group discussions, interviews, and the surveys themselves. Over to you, Emily.
Thank you, Rika. So on to our conceptual lens then. We are in the stages of conceptualizing a higher education, a capability for higher education outreach. I won't go into the very from the beginning introduction to capability approach in the hope that it's now becoming quite a common thing to at least have a background knowledge on, but I'll introduce at least how we are deploying it. Anyway, I'm sure many of you will know the capability approach has been already employed extensively within higher education scholarship. But predominantly this is for understanding student capabilities, and we are interested in faculty member capabilities. So some of the reasons that we think capabilities approach is something we want to pursue further is due to some of the kind of basic foundational principles. So something that appeals to us is that capability approach considers process as well as input and output. So it's not enough to invest resources in outreach activities if no one wants to do them or knows how to do them. So thinking about how you get from input to output is important. And then the fact that in capabilities approach, there's a kind of validation of what people have reason to value. And similarly, if faculty members are expected to conduct outreach, if we don't actually know what motivates them to do what they do, in a way we can't really succeed. And then I think the point that as well, having the capability to do something doesn't always result in doing it, so doesn't always result in the achieved functioning. And that's because in between having the ability and doing something is a whole range of factors, including choice and agency, and the fact that, you know, faculty members may well be capable of doing outreach, but not want to do it or not feel able to do it. So trying to think what needs to happen between a capability and a functioning is quite important to us. So looking at the higher education scholarship that deploys capabilities approach more closely, often faculty members are actually positioned as having the potential to expand student capabilities or support students, but failing to do so. I must say faculty members don't come across very well in studies of disadvantaged students. And studies that are sort of focusing in on faculty members' capabilities are not particularly looking at higher education outreach. So there are studies on faculty members in relation to sustainability and service learning. So there's a bit of a kind of potential gap that we're filling here. And we think that there is scope for further consideration of faculty members' own capabilities of conducting higher education outreach, which then means that they serve as enablers for expanding students' capabilities in accessing higher education. So thinking about faculty members as capability expanders, if you like. So yes, that's what we're trying to contribute to through this conceptualization. And in doing so, we're drawing specifically on the work by Melanie Walker and Monica McLean on professional education and public good professionalism to develop our higher education outreach capability. So Melanie and Monica's work is framed within a wider understanding of universities as contributing to the public good. And that is a major framing for our project as well, that the idea is that the university doesn't sit on its own, but it somehow contributes to social transformation. And through that, the idea that professionals can contribute to reducing injustice through their actions. By becoming what we might call professional citizens and becoming hopeful professionals rather than just standing back helplessly from social injustice and letting it go, rather taking up a hopeful position towards tackling it. So while Melanie Monica's work focuses on professional university education, such as training social workers to be public good professionals, we see the applicability to faculty members in higher education institutions, thinking of academics also as professionals who support the capability expansion of their clients or here students by exercising their professional capabilities as public good functionings. So thinking about a professional capability for higher education outreach is a kind of important thing for us, because we think that already embedded in an orientation towards higher education outreach is a kind of ethical and vocational orientation towards social justice. We see it as embedded and intertwined with higher education outreach and intertwined with the purpose of the university in and of itself. So when we're trying to move from Melanie and Monica's work in quite a different context to our project, some of the things that we're taking forward into our analysis are around what might be the functionings that make up the higher education outreach capability. You know, maybe the capability is the endpoint, but within it, there are all these small functionings that need to happen for the capability to be a capability. What's the role of institutional culture in framing the context for outreach? What's the role of resources availability? And where does the personal biography of faculty members feed into the idea of professional capability? So now Arokia is going to talk through the findings, and this is from our pilot study, just to reiterate.
Thank you, Emily. I'll talk through the 5 key findings that emerges from the pilot study, and then hand over to Emily for synthesizing further discussions regarding the findings. The first finding that I want to emphasize from the team is regarding that higher education outreach is happening. As emphasized earlier, that faculty members are actively involved in an informal practice of higher education outreach. What does this mean? This means, for example, in the quote that I have presented there, an institutional leader talks about an acquaintance that he made through someone whom he guided as a brother and helped him access higher education in Delhi. Or Athene's example again, like she helping her father's gardener to help him to make choices, higher education choices for his daughters. So these are informal spaces where faculty members are placed in their professional identities as providing the capability expander role of enabling higher education access in a way. So it is happening, but in the informal circles of it. And it's quite interesting to note that even within the diary entries, the faculty member mentioned all the higher education outreach advice that they had provided to over the 6 weeks period as personal connections rather than as their professional roles. So this might be a reflection of where the higher education outreach occurs or how it is viewed by in the absence of the structural presence or absence of higher education outreach per se. Through the survey, it is evident that around the majority of faculty members from the college, that is around 93.3%, reported that they had engaged in some or other form of higher education outreach in their professional life cycle. But when we consider student responses, that is the undergraduate student responses, it's quite bleak in the sense only 13 valid responses from students indicate that they had some sort of support from the faculty members while making higher education decisions. So what does this mean? This opens up like an interesting question regarding who are the faculty members then advising regarding higher education, and who are the students who are accessing this college, which is located in a periphery, and what happens to those who do not have any acquaintance who is a faculty member? How are they making choices? So this did like difference in percentages between faculty members and the undergraduate students opens up interesting questions to be further explored. Leading to the next finding, this leads neatly to the next finding in the sense, in order to understand higher education outreach practices as a capability, we might have to further unpack in the sense, what are the faculty members doing that counts as higher education outreach? Or like, who are the people who are getting benefited from the outreach? Or what are the context in which higher education outreach is happening? So in the sense, it was interesting to note that the most common form of advice that faculty members engaged in was to help students decide regarding the higher education institutions, whether they should go for higher education or should go for some other diploma programs or other allied courses, post-school options, or how should they land their course subject of their aspiration, or general checking on admission processes, examination related things, or entry requirements that were needed. So faculty members were consulted for a wide range of things for undergraduate higher education participation. But who are the people who are who benefit from faculty members' outreach practices? These are usually most prevalently extended family members, neighbors. Residents of faculty members plays an important role because the informal nature of higher education practices happens mostly in the neighborhood. One such example is a faculty member recounting in the survey that in a temple gathering, the faculty member engaged in higher education practice outreach in the sense they like involved in advising a girl at a temple regarding how they should go about their higher education choice making. The context then opens up an interesting fact because here resources become important. So it's usually over phone, over internet, or like home spaces of the faculty members, which serves as sites of higher education outreach, a place where higher education outreach, counseling, and guidance goes on. That means, in absence of structural resources or recognition, faculty members are doing it informally out of their own pockets from their own resources based on the professional identity that they hold within the locale. The third finding that came out is like what could be the motivation? The motivation was linked to the fact that faculty members were able to recognize the public good professionalism that was associated with their roles as faculty members in colleges. So the motivation was, in a sense, as Emily had talked about earlier, as Victor's diary entry illustrated, that he saw a sense of social responsibility towards his students or towards the community per se. Victor is also involved in the tribal collective within his own neighborhood. So that space also extends as a space for higher education advice and counseling, where he could engage with future students to come into higher education practice. That means the faculty members are motivated by their individual connection with the students, the concerns that they have for a particular individual candidate, or they see this as an allied role of their profession and see it as a responsibility or a duty that they need to do, they are compelled to do in their informal spaces as well. This also features from the biographical, like life biographies of the faculty members themselves. For example, the principal acknowledges, the institutional recognizes the hard facts that hard life he had to access higher education, and thus the need to focus on institutions, higher education outreach practices, or faculty member who set up other venues, such as one faculty member had set up a YouTube channel as a resource to offer advice on higher education choices or how one could go about figuring out the higher education admission processes and all. So on the whole, the faculty member voluntarily acted as capability expanders in terms of Walker and McLean. The fourth finding is, it's important because it links with the third finding, in the sense the institutional culture, as I was talking earlier, is shaped by the principal's positioning and his own personal trajectory, where his presence or like his leadership has an important role in shaping the institutional culture, where faculty members see higher education outreach as a public good professionalism of expanding capabilities, enabling students to make informed choices about higher education. So the college in itself had many engagements with, such as supporting, providing help desk during the admission seasons or providing online sessions to the schools that were present, in order to enable them to make higher education choices. But it also there was a sense of enabling the current students to be successful in their lives. So that also came through, though it was not directly our concern for the project, it inevitably seeped in at every finding that the current students were also in a way channeled to the next higher education step or towards career choices that were there. So the institution ethos or culture itself was shaped by the faculty member who constituted the higher education institution space within this pilot study context. While talking about what are the factors or actors within the higher education space, inevitably they talked about the constraints that were there for higher education outreach. Certain constraints that were mentioned were regarding the resources. For example, lack of earmarked funds for carrying out higher education outreach practices in the absence of structural recognition of higher education outreach, or as simple as space constraint to provide higher education outreach as a sustained practice rather than as a seasonal one during the admission seasons. But another interesting thing that we could catch up from the pilot study was the change in admission processes. That means like Delhi was undergoing a shift towards centralization of admission processes, which meant that prospective undergraduate student had lesser contact with the higher education institution than they previously had, where they had to visit. Now the centralized system meant that the student could apply to a higher education institution online. That means their physical presence, going exploring, the admission process, which could have familiarized them in the higher education context, was further limited. And the second thing was faculty members themselves were consulting and still figuring out what it meant for the admission processes itself, what it was doing to who gets into higher education, or like who makes into higher education or who remains back. That means they're still exploring and getting used to the transition from a traditional to an online system of admission processes themselves. And this is, we are quite curious to see how this appears from the 6 states that we have selected for the project. And other thing that comes in, when higher education outreach engagement is not recognized as a workload, then it becomes this allied work responsibility that the faculty members have to juggle along other things. So it, in a sense, there is this absence of time or resource allocation, human resource allocation that could be done for higher education outreach. And the practical problem of whom to connect and how to connect. Where do I go in order to connect to prospective students? How would I know that all students enrolled in a school would be interested in higher education? Or like how to approach that was some concerns which came out quite evidently from faculty member diaries as well as the interviews. Over to Emily now for further reflections on the findings.
Marika, and we're just concluding here. Bravo on covering all that. So just to come back then to that initial flavour that we gave at the beginning of the presentation, where we've now gone on quite a long journey to come back to this point of thinking about the those academics we got to know in the first moments of our talk, and thinking about the fact that there's this issue of trust, that faculty members can be seen as trusted and to guide properly as sources of knowledge, but within that capability needing to have, say, the resources and the training, etc., to actually enact that guidance in a fulsome way. Thinking about Athene's quote about the fathers, gardeners, daughters, that what we've seen is that faculty members were trying to help whoever was in the radius of their lives, but in that sense you had to be in somewhere connected with a faculty member in order to avail of advice from them. So how to think beyond that kind of neighborhood or that life radius towards a more generalized sense of assistance. And then thinking about what Victor was saying about the sense of social responsibility that we've now framed as a kind of public good professionalism that will take so much more to formalize and make official. So just our concluding thoughts then. So our initial pilot study, and that we can say with certainty, but from the initial findings coming in from the 6 states we're working in as well, we can definitely say that a lot of higher education outreach is happening in Indian academia, but in a kind of informal way. So we can say that academics in India are exercising their professional capabilities as professional good functionings. And that this is supplementing the dearth of formal information and guidance for young people in disadvantaged communities. But as we've shown, that the informal nature of higher education outreach practices means that support is uneven and taking place in the radius of faculty members' everyday lives. And at the same time as well, the fact that higher education outreach isn't formally recognised means that there isn't training or development in that area, official funding or resources or workload recognition. So essentially, that's what we are working towards with our project and our partnership with NEPA through Dr. Nidhi Sabharwal, aspiring towards, in a sense, actually changing the policy landscape. That's our grand aspiration of Indian higher education, to recognise a capability for higher education outreach within the policy landscape, and to think of it as an important strand that needs support and work, particularly for those disadvantaged students living in more rural and semi-urban areas. So I think we can conclude here. Thanks for joining me, Arokia. Thanks so much again for the invitation, and we're really looking forward to your questions. And if anyone would like to ask questions in Hindi or Tamil, we would also be very happy to hear them if English is less confident for anyone asking questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Presentation. Okay, we've got about 15 minutes now for questions and discussion. So if you're online, I do encourage you to put a question in the chat if you'd like to ask something. But I'll start off in the room. Is there anybody here in the room who has questions you'd like to ask? Just go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
Could you also introduce yourself? So that
Yes. Yeah, I'm quite interested in this topic. And you talk about the role of faculty member in helping students from disadvantaged backgrounds for college admission. I'm also wondering, except for the help from faculty member, if there are some commercial agents for guiding students to choose the college, and what are other resources for students to gain information about college admission. So yeah, it's a little bit like different aspects about this issue. I hope to have more information about this issue in English.
Would you mind just introducing yourself so our speakers know who?
Yeah, my name is Anding Shi. I'm a third-year DPhil student in higher education.
We address each question as
That's okay.
yeah, sure. Should I start? Or do you want to start? Yep. So thank you so much for your question and for coming along. And definitely there are lots of different sources through which students are gaining the information that they need for their higher education choices. And you will have to supplement my information here. The agents are certainly operating, and I would say maybe particularly for the international market, but probably also for the domestic market. There's a lot of access through things like tuition classes, coaching classes, through cyber cafes as well. A major thing is that in lots of rural areas, people don't have necessarily internet at home. So go to cyber cafes, and people who run cyber cafes end up as being almost like informal education guidance counselors. In these slightly more privileged schools, there are often career counselling, and quite a lot of advice is happening at schools, and something that we want to kind of advocate within our wider sense of higher education outreach is more partnerships between faculty members and colleges and schools. So that gives a bit of a scattering. Would you like to add anything there?
Just to build on Emily's response, in the sense like higher education outreach practices are quite strong within the private higher education systems, and students use those sessions quite interestingly, in the sense like that came up from our pilot study as well, in the sense students would go to those sessions in order to gain understanding of higher education processes and decide of their subject choices or what they could most make out of it. But
even without any intention of going to a private institution, they would use the session.
So those are the sites. Usually these are absent in the public spaces. And as Emily pointed out, the international student market has agents which are quite different from the local higher education choice making market. So yeah, there are other like paid higher education agents present in the scene as well. Is that answer?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
After you, please.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. I found this research really interesting. Because me personally, in my first few years as a faculty member, I also did such kind of, supervising role for my family members or some relatives. But I found that actually, I recommend most of my, for example, friends' children to study the same major as I did, the same major as I did.
Yeah.
But I found that actually after they entered into college and studied this major, and it turned out they won't be very successful, So after that, I totally give up this kind of guidance. So I'm wondering, I mean, you in your research you emphasize so much on the faculty's new role, right? As this, but I think in China, for example, I think the faculty, most faculty members, they have this information deficit or the information. I don't know the word asymmetry means they don't understand every disciplines, every majors, right? So how can they be qualified, right? Qualified to shoulder such an important role. What if they give wrong suggestion, right? So I just want to hear about your thoughts on this, or insight on this. Thank you.
That's a fantastic question. Thank you. I just wanted to see if Nidhi, you wanted to come in and address. Could you hear that question? Should we see if you are you able to unmute? Yeah.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Oh, I think we did it at the same time.
Yes, you have to do it actually. I think yes. You have to do it, Rachel.
And then if you unmute now, Nidhi.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thank you. Yes. Thank you for that question, and well done, both Emily and Arokia, for such a nice and concise presentation. So that's what we are arguing. In fact, by participating in higher education outreach activities, formal higher education outreach activities, faculty members not only support students in overcoming barriers to higher education, but enhance their own professional capabilities, such as communication, such as breaking down those complex admission processes, complex academic concepts, which then is connected to choosing subjects, what subjects to choose. So this, we are arguing that formalized higher education outreach practices and training on to faculty members on higher education outreach practices will in fact support their professional capabilities, both in terms of communication as well as in fact nurturing mentorship and leadership qualities as well. Also, in parallel, supporting achieving their important functionings like personal fulfillment, intellectual growth, and professional development. So that's what I could understand, and I hope this answers the question. Thank you.
You want to add something?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
It's interesting. The question was quite interesting in the way, I took a comparative lens to the question in the sense where a stream of professional services within the public system exists in certain country contexts like UK to help you land into to facilitate that bridge between students and higher education institutions, let it be private or public. But in context less, for example, I could speak confidently about India, not China, that if faculty members are given this role of doing higher education outreach, and if they do not have the knowledge, there might be, as you point out, that would not lead to what the students are looking for, or the faculty members themselves might have limited knowledge. As Nidhi ma'am was quite emphatic in the fact that the project looks forward to build that capability, but in the absence of higher education practice, I think we need to start somewhere. And the starting point would not be better than faculty members. Maybe in future, the trajectory could change. But for now, to begin with, to start somewhere structurally, I think faculty members are best placed in that position, if provided some support, would be able to do that. So yeah.
It's just that we've got a couple of questions online.
Okay, just quickly. Just follow on from that. I think it's really interesting in the context of lack of professional services. It does actually put another burden on faculty, and they're already burdened with the pressures from them. Potentially, I assume there could be an accusation of favoritism or perceived favoritism towards the relatives of. I mean, it does blur the personal and professional, as you exactly pointed out. So I'm very interested you arguing for that rather than arguing for investment in the professional service outreach function of universities. I'm interested in that choice.
I think we're seeing that in the sense of faculty members are perhaps a stepping stone towards a more established professional services culture. But I see Anne has has revealed herself essentially. Anne, did you want to come in on that as well?
Not particularly that. I was thinking about one of the responses to the comment in the chat later. But,
Okay.
yeah. But I could say something. I think it's a stepping stone in the sense that there isn't any professional cadre in the public sector to support this type of activity. Clearly, as Arokia has indicated, the private sector in India is much more developed in terms of their an incipient professional cadre of officers who support the private, particularly those that are focusing on the sort of more international market, but certainly not within the public sector at the moment. But I think probably faculty members, as Emily's indicating, is a first step, really. But I could just add that in our first study, our taster day was a means when we piloted our taster day from the first study. That was one of the elements. We were, in a sense, working with faculty members to provide that level of information that they could then import or impart as part of their day. So we produced a pack which enabled them in a rudimentary way at a basic level to provide better quality information than the guy at the local cyber cafe was offering, basically. So I think it's one has to take a relativity on this.
Thank you. Okay, we're quite short of time now, so if I can invite Adam Woodidge, who's put a couple of questions in the chat. Adam, would you want to unmute and ask your question yourself?
Sure. You may not be able to see me. I've got limited internet. I'm in West Bengal at the moment. Super interesting and lots of really rich insights. Thank you. Yeah, I had two questions just trying to think through what you were talking about. And one was, I was really caught by this idea of the radius of life. And in fact, I think both questions come back to this. One is kind of, what are the implications for that and this informality of it? Again, on this question of identity. So who then might be included in those forms of informal outreach, and especially in these areas that often have lots of spatial segregation as well as spatial inequality. I'd be super interested, even thinking back to gender and then how gender might have an intersectional relationship with religion, for example, but also adivasi-ness, caste, like all of these things. It would be super interesting if there were some insights. If HE outreach is only happening in this informal way, and so appears to be happening in an everydayness, what are kind of the spatial inequalities of that everydayness that contributes to what actually happens in terms of the outreach? And then my second question was again around that radius of life, and that kind of really ticked it. But often when I speak to students here, the decision-making process, and again, it's not homogenous, it depends on the student and the background, but often it's a very parent-student together kind of thing with a lot of other pressures. And so I was kind of just thinking about your conceptualization. I wondered actually if you kind of need to throw out a little bit of the rule book in how we have typically in the West thought about what HE access and who we're speaking to with in terms of student choice. And I wonder actually like how much of a role is there for dialogue with parents being central, because it sounds like that's kind of happening with the Radius of Life anyway, but actually maybe they're a really important stakeholder in student decision making. I would love to chat more. It's super interesting.
Thank you so much for those questions. And I was just a bit concerned that I think Abdul Rashid had their hand up and then has put it down again.
I was going to come to him afterwards. Yeah. But if you want to put your question in the chat, Abdul Rashid, or do you want to ask it now actually, and then we can try and cover everything and ask you to respond.
I can quickly share. Yeah, I'm just for a school run, but I will ask on my way. But what it's very interesting talk, Emily and Arokia. An interesting relationship about community outreach and HE outreach. My question is in relation to the have you thought about, because India is actually like in terms of technology is really it's really booming in terms of online resource, HE doing some online resources for the students to choose from. And what is about, for example, because if a child or a person is choosing HE choices, they usually have to be contacted at high school level or at college level before they come to This is like the informal part is really interesting, but is there, for example, like a concerted effort of going actually going to the schools and formalizing them at the source level so that at least more people can be reached instead of like depending on your connection, because this is really like a small space and the reach is really small, and a lot of others disadvantaged people could be further be disadvantaged through connection based outreach, it appears to me. And the other bit is that this is a bit very different from Africa perspective, but is the HE faculty members actually going to the field to actually showcase some of the work they do at the college, at university level, to actually, for example, like in the community, to show them in terms of a problem solving approach, so that people can be made interested into applying to the sources in practical perspective, very different from the northern perspective.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. All of those questions very briefly, if you want to appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much for the rich questions. Shall I offer a scattering of, I'm looking over there as if Anna maybe can, shall I offer a quick scattering of things, and then if there's sort of a burning last word, come in. So thank you very much for the questions. Firstly, I just want to make absolutely clear, in case it hasn't been clear, that we are not advocating for informal outreach. We are exploring what's already happening with the idea of then developing a, if you like, culturally specific, appropriate type of form of higher education outreach that can lead into the professional development of faculty members to formalize that kind of work. So we are finding all kinds of inequalities within the informal outreach, but our goal is then to try and tackle some of those inequalities that very much are happening where, you know, for example, if you're helping within your personal network, it's very likely that it's along the same caste lines or faith lines or whatever. So all of that is unfolding in that way, absolutely, in the informal outreach. And one way of trying to equalize outreach is to formalize it. I'm glad you brought up about the parents, and again, that was one of the things that, how many things can we cover? But we don't conceptualize the higher education prospective applicant as an autonomous chooser. We conceptualize the higher education applicant as a node in a wider network of family and personal connections. And for example, in our first project, the Taster Day was designed to invite family members to the college as well, under the clear notion that decisions are often not made by the young person, but by their wider family network. So in that sense, although we didn't explicitly state that today, that was very much part of our conceptualization. And then the other thing I just wanted to clarify is that when we're talking about higher education outreach by faculty members, we're not only talking about one-on-one guidance, like it could be a faculty member, like we said, setting up a YouTube channel, or actually motivating a group of student ambassadors to go back to a village and talk to the young people there about what higher education involves. So the faculty member doesn't have to do everything, and they can motivate things, they can encourage young people to do different kinds of activities. So using technology, or at least trying to visit a village or sending students to visit a village, is all part of the purview of the outreach that we're thinking of. In view of time, I'm not sure if you have a moment for me to just ask my teammates if they want to add any final burning things. Nidhi, did you want to add anything?
Just quickly about gender, in our case, when we look at the student survey and we've asked this question, their involvement, so we do find that it's more likely that there is a gender advantage with respect to men with boys students, so they're more likely for faculty members to be involved in their higher education decision making. However, when we look at our data, we do find that it's in terms of caste aspect, it's more likely that from students from the disadvantaged caste groups are more likely to be are more likely to say that there was an involvement of faculty member from for their higher education when they were accessing higher education. So there is that sort of the positive aspect around it, and it's not surprising because affirmative action is there, and affirmative action is helping, supporting students, supporting communities to generations to access higher education, and that supports the rationale for the affirmative action and social justice rationale. So just in terms of identity, that's where we are at, and these are like some preliminary quick analysis that we did, and of course we're going to unpack the reasons and the sources behind it.
Okay, I think we will have to finish that, but I'd just like to thank Emily and Arokia and also colleagues online very much for your contributions.
Note that Professor Rajeshri from our Haryana team is here, and Dr. Ashkarali from our Kerala team. I've just noticed they're both in the list as well. So thank you very much to our team members for joining as well.
Thank you, and thank you very much for people who've come along in the room to listen and also online. And just a reminder that next week Ed Penn is speaking as part of the CG series, and the title of his talk is "Access is not about taking people who are already superstars, exploring constructions of merit and fairness in the University of Oxford's undergraduate admissions route." So do join us next week if you're interested in hearing that talk. But big thank you to Emily and Arokia.